Hey guys, today we're doing Chapter 3, Section 6, which is on scale changes of data sets. So if you remember from Section 3, I believe it was, we did translations of data sets, where basically we're just applying the principles that we learned about translations on graphs to data. That's essentially what we're doing here. We're just going to talk about those scale changes, but we're going to talk about it with data sets rather than actual functions. So a scale change of a data set, if you're given a data set x1 up through x sub n, the transformation that maps x sub I onto a times x sub I, where a is some constant, is going to be your scale change. So essentially what we're doing is we're just multiplying each of our x sub I values by some number a. Remember our 11 workers from before who made the following on a normal 8-hour day: 70, 70, 70, 75, 75, 78, 78, 80, 90, 95, 120. Okay, so again, we're just using the same exact data that we did in Section 3. We want to calculate the mean, median, range, variance, and standard deviation. Remember how we did that last time was we went into our stat edit and we filled in our list 1 with those values. Okay, so I've got all my data points here, and then I can just go to stat, calc, and do my one variable stat. Okay, so for my, oh, I must have entered in a data point wrong. Yep. So for my mean, I get 81.9. For my standard deviation, I get 14.28. For my median, I have 78. So if I go back here, fill that stuff in. Okay. For my variance, that gives me 203.63, because remember, if I just square my standard deviation, I get my variance. For my range, I just take 120 minus 70, that gives me 50. Alright, so now I've got all those data values in here. Okay, what if these workers only work for 6 hours instead of 8? So instead of working their full 8-hour shift, they're only working 6 hours. We want to write the data set which represents their earnings in 6 hours, and then we want to find all of the measurements for that set as well. So if I know that I'm working only 6 hours instead of 8 hours, what am I going to multiply each of my values by? Well, 6 out of 8, that reduces to 3 out of 4. So essentially you're just taking 3/4 or 75% of each of your original data points to figure out how much they would make in 6 hours. So your translation is going to be 3/4 times x. So we're taking our x sub I values and we're multiplying them by 3/4. To get that, I'm just going to go back into my stat edit, and in my list 2, I'm going to take 0.75, which is 3/4, times my list 1. And that fills in my data set for my list 2. So now I can go ahead and I can copy that data set back onto here. Alright, so now I've got my data set, and now I can go, and if I want to get my one variable statistics for this data set, I'm just going to move it over to my list 1. So I'm going to clear this out, and I'm going to put my list 2 in there. So now I've got that data set, and I can clear this one out. And now I'm just going to go to my stat, calc, I'm going to do my one variable statistics again. So now my mean is 61.43, my standard deviation is 10.71. If I go down, my median is 58.5. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill those in. So if I square my standard deviation, that gives me my variance, which is going to be 114.7. And then my range, if I just take my 90 minus my 52.5, that gives me a range of 37.5. Okay, so now I need to figure out how has my mean, median, range, variance, and standard deviation, how have each of these components been affected by the scale change? Well, hopefully you notice that the mean and the median, they were changed just by being multiplied by 3/4. So if I take my original mean, 81.9, and multiply it by 3/4, that's going to give me this new mean of 61.43. Same thing with my median. If I take that 78 and I multiply it by 3/4, that's going to give me my 58.5. So the mean and the median, those just changed how you would expect by being multiplied by that A value. Okay, the range is the same thing. If I multiply my original range, which is 50, by 3/4, that's going to give me my 37.5. Now the variance and standard deviation, that's a little bit different. So let's just go through all the rules right now. In general, if each element of a data set is multiplied by a factor A, then the mean is multiplied by A, the mode is multiplied by A, the median is multiplied by A. Okay, those are all just pretty normal. The variance is multiplied by A squared, because if I'm going to take that value and multiply it by A and for a standard deviation, and then I want to get into my variance, I have to square it. So essentially, it's just the same thing as being multiplied by A squared. The standard deviation is multiplied by the absolute value of A. It's really important to remember that a standard deviation cannot be negative. So if your A value is negative, your standard deviation can't be negative, so we have to take the absolute value of that to make sure that we're going to get a positive answer. Same thing with the range. Our range can't be a negative number because we're taking our maximum minus our minimum. There's no way that our maximum could be smaller than our minimum. So our range has to be positive. So again, we have to take that A value and take the absolute value of it. So all of these are pretty straightforward. The only one that's a little bit confusing maybe is the variance. So just remember that if you just get the standard deviation, if you get your new standard deviation and then just square that, that's the same thing as just taking your old variance and multiplying it by A squared. So I would just probably find your new standard deviation using this method and then square that to get your new variance. And that's everything for section 6.